Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Guys That Magic, and we're back with another video. This time, we are bringing you a fun Precon upgrade for the new release of March of the Machines. This video will be dedicated to Tinker Time, and Tinker Time is going to be upgraded by our good friend David. David, say what's up, man.
Hey, how's it going?
David, I gotta say, man, I am super excited to see what you do with this deck. You always bring some fun tinkering aspects to decks, and I'm glad to see what you did. So
See
I
what you
guess,
did there.
yeah, you did. Yeah, listen, man, I had to tinker with the video. Oh, I did it again. But yeah. So let's go ahead and talk about the deck a little bit. I'll let you take it away.
All right, so this is a teamer deck which focuses heavily on artifacts, which is kind of interesting because we don't typically get to see that strategy within this color combination. So kind of interesting to see that. And then it can be held by one of two different legendary creatures. The first one being Gimbal Gremlin Prodigy. He is 2, a green, a blue, and a red for a total of 5 mana. It's a legendary creature, Gremlin Artificer. It's a 4/4 and says the artifact creatures you control have trample. And it also says at the beginning of your end step, create a 0/0 red Gremlin artifact creature token. Put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of differently named artifact tokens you control. So he's a little bit of an oddball. He's a token generator, but he kind of cares more about really kind of going wide in terms of like making sure you have a treasure and a clue and a thopter, as well as like tons of other weird things.
I also love the fact that he's basically making a copy of himself.
Yeah. I mean, he's tinkering away. He's doing what he does best. He's making little versions of himself with whatever he can find. With that being said, that is the face commander of this deck. However, for the purposes of this upgrade, I've decided that I'm actually going to move away from him. He's still going to be in the 99, so if you want to play around with him, he's definitely going to continue to be in the deck, at least for now. However, I do really feel like he's really similar to the Urza commander for the Urza Precon that we just got. So I want to play around with the other legendary creature in the deck, and this one being Rashmi and Ragavan. Everybody's favorite monkey is back. So Rashmi and Ragavan is 1, a green, a blue, and a red for a legendary creature elf monkey. It's a 2/4, and it says whenever you cast your first spell during each of your turns, exile the top card of target opponent's library and create a treasure token. Then you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost if it's a spell with mana value less than the number of artifacts you control. If you don't cast it this way, you may cast it this turn.
Way better.
Very different. She doesn't really care so much that you're going to be going wide in like tokens. Or like token artifacts. She still cares that you're going to have a lot of artifacts in play. But she does not really be making like the token army for us. So she's a little bit different. She's going to provide us like some card advantage. Hopefully we can steal some of our opponent's things from the top of their library. I just kind of looked at her and thought, I think there's a little bit more I can do with this deck with Rashmi as a commander than rather with Gimbal. So decided to go in this direction instead.
Yeah, cheaper cost-wise too, which always makes me happy.
Yep.
All right, well let's go ahead and jump into it.
All right, so for this video, I had $100 to play around with, as Steven had already mentioned. So the first card that we're going to be adding into this is Lantern of Insight. This is a single mana for an artifact that says each player plays with the top card of his or her library revealed. It also has an ability where you can tap it and sacrifice it and have target player shuffle his or her library. This kind of an effect is so important in this list because not only does this count towards your total number of artifact count, which works really well with Rashmi and Ragavan, but this allows you to see which opponent you want to target. That way you know if you're going to be able to hit something good off of them. You can hopefully avoid hitting a land off the top because if she can't get the lands, Rashmi's trigger is a cast ability. So you can't play their lands from the top of the library. There is that whiff potential, but Lantern of Insight gives you that information. That way you're always hitting something good.
I also just love the fact that, obviously this is a 100 upgrade, but if you bring this to the table and anybody's tutoring for things and puts it on the top of their library, you could really just wreck their day.
Oh, you absolutely could. I mean, you can have them force shuffle their library, which is a nice little effect of Lantern, but I still really want this card in play, sticking around to help me out.
100%.
So we have 3 creatures that I wanted to throw into this deck that generally just kind of work really well with artifact-based decks. The first one here is Drafna, founder of Latnam. This is 1 and a blue for a legendary creature, Human Artificer Advisor. He's a 2/1 that has an ability to allow you to pay 1 and a blue to return target artifact you control to its owner's hand. He's got a second ability where you can pay 3 and tap him to copy target artifact spell you control. And then the copy becomes a token. So this is going to help to feed in once again with your overall artifact count. Hopefully be able to make sure that you're getting like some duplicates in there that are really impactful or really important to your game plan.
I mean, pretty strong for 2 mana, man. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah, 2 mana for the initial drop. His mana abilities are a little mana intensive, and one of them does require that he tap down as well. So you're probably not going to be attacking with this creature anytime soon, but he provides a lot of utility. The next creature here is Fairy Artisans. This is 3 and a blue, a total of 4 mana. It's a creature Fairy Artificer, and it's a 2/2 with flying. It says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Then exile all other tokens created with Fairy Artisans. So you're only going to get 1 token at a time, but you're kind of going to duplicate whatever your opponents just did. So in a way, it kind of disincentivizes them from saying, like, spending all 7 mana and dropping their 7-drop, because then you're going to get a copy of the creature as well.
I mean, that's pretty solid.
And then the last one here is Treasure Nabber, more of just kind of an annoyance piece rather than anything else. Treasure Nabber is 2 and a red for a creature Goblin Rogue. It's a 3/2, and it says whenever an opponent taps an artifact for mana, gain control of that artifact until the end of your next turn. So you'll have access to their Soul Ring, their Talisman, whatever it is they tapped.
Yeah, I run this in my Krenko deck, and it is aggressively annoying, so I can't wait to see this against you.
Diving in from there, though, some of the other cards that we included in here, I wanted to kind of move away from the create any kind of like odd token and wanted to focus a little bit more on specifically treasures for the purpose of this deck. And I say treasures because I think that it's really important that we be able to not only get a lot of tokens in play, but also be able to make sure that we have all that mana so that if we can't just cheat in whatever our opponent got from the top of the library for free, we can still cast whatever that thing was. So first up here, we have Galazeth Prismari. This is 2, a blue, and a red for a legendary creature, Elder Dragon. It is a 3/4 with flying and says whenever it enters the battlefield, create a treasure token. It also says the artifacts you control can tap to add 1 mana of any color, but spend this mana only to cast instant or sorcery spells. So he kind of pseudo helps us ramp. He does get a treasure in play just by getting this guy into play himself, and then provides a nice little body for us too.
Yeah, anytime you can get a 4 mana, 3/4 flying in the air that generates you a treasure, and then in an artifact deck, you get to tap them to play spells, I think that's solid, man. I'm not going to lie to you.
We have Professional Facebreaker in this list. This is 2 and a red for a creature human warrior. It's a 2/3 with menace, and it says whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. He's got another ability where you can sacrifice a treasure token to exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. And then lastly, we have Goldspan Dragon. Goldspan Dragon is 3 and 2 red for a creature dragon. It's a 4/4 with flying and haste. It says whenever Goldspan Dragon attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure token. It also says treasures you control can tap and sacrifice to add 2 mana of any one color.
The fact that this card still hasn't been eroded into a legendary creature is mind-blowing to me.
I mean, if it were a legendary creature, you could use it at the helm of the deck, and I think that might be pushing it a bit.
I just don't want to see 2 of them.
We have 3 other cards in this list that are going to help us out with our treasure token production. The first one here is the Reaver Cleaver. The Reaver Cleaver is 2 and a red for a legendary artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, create that many treasure tokens. It's got an equip cost of 3.
I mean, amazingly solid card, especially being an artifact for this artifact theme deck. You gotta love it.
Yeah, so it gives us a nice little pump, gives us some more treasures. The Reaver Cleaver actually is an insane card if left unchecked.
I mean, everyone loves a good pump.
Up next, we have Fable of the Mirror Breaker. I feel like I have talked about this card so extensively over the last couple of months just because it's popping up in every single format. This is 2 and a red for an enchantment saga. On the first mode, it says create a 2/2 Goblin Shaman creature token with, whenever this creature attacks, create a treasure token. The second mode says you may discard up to 2 cards. If you do, draw that many cards. And then the last mode says exile the saga, return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. Whenever it enters the battlefield transformed under your control, it enters as Reflection of Kiki Jiki, which is an enchantment creature, Goblin Shaman. It's a 2/2 that you can pay 1 and tap it to create a token that's a copy of another target non-legendary creature you control. That creature has haste, and you sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So there is a lot to unpack with this card. It gives us some token production, some treasure production off of the 2/2 that it creates. Helps to filter out our hand a little bit, make sure that we're hitting the cards that we need to be hitting. And then past that, it's just going to be able to provide so much value making copies of things. We do have a decent number of creatures in here that we want to be able to copy, maybe take advantage of some ETBs, or maybe just like temporarily bump up the number of artifact creatures and artifacts in total that we have.
Yeah, this card is a menace in every format, I feel like.
And then, of course, we have probably my favorite inclusion in a deck like this, which is Reign of Riches. Reign of Riches is 3 and 2 red for a total of 5 mana. It is an enchantment that says whenever it enters the battlefield, create 2 treasure tokens. It also says the first spell you cast each turn that mana from a treasure was spent to cast has Cascade. For those of you who aren't familiar and maybe don't remember, Cascade says that whenever you cast that spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast it without paying its mana cost and put the exiled cards on the bottom of your library in a random order.
I mean, pretty solid here, buddy.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about Reign of Riches as well is that it doesn't actually care where the first card was cast from. And since our commander allows us to cast cards from the top of our opponent's libraries, if we cast one of those, we'll still Cascade.
I didn't even think about that, actually. That's pretty good. David, that last one's pretty scary, but I have a small feeling you have some scarier cards coming up.
Yeah, we got 2 other really scary cards that I want to talk about, and then a couple of other includes that are going to help the deck function a little bit better. The first of the scary 2 cards that I'm going to talk about is Strionic Resonator. This is 2 mana for an artifact that you can pay 2 mana and tap it to copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. The reason why this is really scary and really powerful in this list is because Strionic Resonator allows us to copy Rashmi and Ragavan's ability. Which, by the way, the entire block of text that I read at the very beginning of the video is all just one ability. So you'll copy being able to cast one of your opponent's things and make the treasure token.
Good card, good.
Yeah, Strionic Resonator, because of those treasure tokens too, it essentially pays for itself back because you're going to make the 2 mana off the treasures. And then, of course, the other scary card that he was alluding to, this deck is relatively light in terms of removal, and there happens to be a Planeswalker that not only makes artifact tokens, but happens to be incredibly good at removal. We're going to be throwing in Oko, Thief of Crowns. This is 1 a green and a blue for a total of 3 mana, and if you've never played with Oko before, well, you're kind of fortunate because this card is a mess. Oko is a Planeswalker that enters the battlefield with 4 loyalty. He's got 3 abilities, the first of which is a +2 that says create a food token. That's nice if we need it to count towards our overall artifact count. The second mode is a +1 and says target artifact or creature loses all abilities and becomes a green elk creature with base power and toughness 3/3. And yes, that does work on your opponent's commanders, and they're going to be very frustrated whenever it happens. The last mode is a -5, which says exchange control of target artifact or creature you control and target creature an opponent controls with power 3 or less. Which, I guess if you really wanted to, you could steal their elk commander that you just made from the last turn, but his first 2 modes are just such an incredibly powerful combination that he sticks around for a very long time. And the continuous removal of just turning everything important that your opponents have into elks is really good.
I'll go on record right now and say I will turn everything sideways at this if it hits the field.
Including the elk?
God damn it. Including the elk.
The last non-land card that we're going to talk about, this deck, I don't know what was going on. I know that it's in Temur, and Temur isn't necessarily known for having board wipes. But this deck really doesn't have any. It's got a couple that wants to function as board wipes, but I just don't feel comfortable not being able to clean up a board state if I need to. So we're going to be throwing Blasphemous Act in here. This is 8 and a red for a total of 9 mana. It's a sorcery, and it says that this spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. it deals 13 damage to each creature. So ideally, and most of the time, Blasphemous Act should be able to kill everything.
Yeah, not to mention, I don't think anyone's ever paid a full 9 mana for this card.
I think the most I've ever paid for this was probably 3.
So good.
Lastly, we're going to go ahead and move on to some of the lands that are going to help to smooth this deck out a little bit. The first 3 cards we're going to talk about here are all 3 artifact lands. So we have Great Furnace, which is an artifact land that taps for a red. Tree of Tales, which is an artifact land that taps for a green. And Seat of the Synod, which is an artifact land that taps for a blue. One for each of the different colors in this list. They're not basic lands. They are artifacts as well, so keep in mind your opponent's artifact removal can hit these, and that's going to suck if it happens. But the reason why I wanted to throw these in is because Rashmi and Ragavan really care about the number of artifacts we have in play. And if we can drop one in play for free in the early game, just being one of our lands, it adds to the count and makes things so much smoother.
Can I just say that I love the fact that you did add a red, a green, and a blue? Little Timur vibe, you know?
Oh, absolutely. We're not done adding the red, the green, and the blue as well. The other 3 cards that I'm going to bring up here also are going to be artifact lands. Also another one of the cycles. So this one being included of Silver Bluff Bridge. This is an artifact land that does enter the battlefield tapped, but this one has indestructible and can tap for either a blue or a red. Slagwood's Bridge, another artifact land, also enters the battlefield tapped and has indestructible, but it can tap for either a red or a green. And then lastly, we have Tangled Pool Bridge. Indestructible, enters the battlefield tapped, and can later on tap for either a green or a blue. So providing the same kind of function as the lands that we talked about earlier, but these ones can tap for 2 different colors instead. And your opponent's artifact removal is going to be much less effective here because these do have indestructible.
Damn it. My plan's gone awry.
Not going to lie, there is no better feeling than dropping one of these turn 1, one of the other lands turn 2, like hopefully ramping something out, and then you get Rashmi out on like turn 4, and you have like 5 artifacts in play. It's great.
I'm kind of nervous. I'm not gonna lie to you, David. The good thing is the includes have been really amazing. So well done. But sadly, when you have really good includes, unfortunately, you do also have to remove some cards from the deck. So let's go ahead and get into some of the removal.
I'm going to get some flack for this one because I know that this is like the big splashy spell a lot of people were excited about, but I'm going to be cutting Dance with Calamity. Dance with Calamity is 7 and a red for a total of 8 mana. It's a sorcery and it says, shuffle your library. As many times as you choose, you may exile the top of your library. If the total mana value of those cards exiled this way is 13 or less, you may cast any number of spells from among those cards without paying their mana costs. This is a really expensive spell that does have quite a bit of upside. But super important for you to notice is that on this card, if you whiff and go 14 mana or higher, you've just spent 8 mana to do nothing.
I don't, yeah.
I mean, we have Lantern of Insight in the deck. Hopefully we have that in place. We can see what the top card of our library is, but I don't like playing this game. And I do feel like this oftentimes is going to turn into an 8 mana. I'm going to take this and use my entire turn to do it and then actually not do anything impactful with it. So, got to get cut.
Yeah, I mean, I can't blame you here, man. I mean, you know, let's just say you don't have the Lantern in play. The whiff potential is pretty strong with this one.
Yeah, the next card that's going to be removed, this is one of the kind of oddball pieces of removal. I'm not entirely sure why this was in the deck to begin with, in all fairness. This is Struggle to Survive. So the first part of this card, Struggle, is 2 and a red for an instant that says Struggle deals damage to target creature equal to the number of lands you control. The second mode is Survive, and this has an aftermath, so you cast the second mode from your graveyard. And it says each player shuffles their graveyard into their library. We're not a recursion-based deck. We don't really care about getting things back from our graveyard, so I don't really understand why Survive is in this list. And Struggle 3 mana to deal a couple points of damage is not very good.
No, easy cut here.
The next 2 cards that we're going to be removing, these are going to be 2 of the newer cards that both reference Plane Chase. Now, if you play Plane Chase, you might want to keep these cards included. I'm not building this with the intention of playing Plane Chase, though. I'm building this list with the intention of just sitting down and playing a traditional game of Commander. So the first one here is Ichor Elixir. This is 4 mana for an artifact that says if you would roll 1 or more planar dice, instead roll that many planar dice plus 1 and ignore 1. In the format that I plan on playing this with, without playing Chase, that line just doesn't do anything. The second ability on this card, it says you can tap it to add 2 colorless mana, so it kind of functions like a Soul Ring. But coming in at 4 mana, this makes it an incredibly expensive mana rock. This is just really slow, and if I have 4 mana, I would rather be casting something that's impactful with that 4 mana. The second card here is Path of the Animist. This is 3 and a green for a sorcery. It says search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. And then it has another ability called Will of the Planeswalkers, and it says, starting with you, each player votes for Planeswalker Chaos. If Planeswalk gets more votes than you Planeswalk, and if Chaos gets more votes, or the vote is tied, Chaos ensues. This is just another one of the Plane Chase-based cards, so if you're not playing Plane Chase, the second mode there won't do anything for you. And although being able to tutor up for 2 basic land cards is nice, I don't want to do that with 4 mana.
I mean, I can't blame you. I pretty much did the same thing in my deck. I just took all the Plane Chase cards out.
Which is kind of a bummer. I don't know. I understand that some people out there would really like to play Plane Chase, and if you do, you can keep it in, but I just think these are kind of suboptimal plays. The next card we're going to be removing is Fiery Confluence. This is 2 and 2 red for a total of 4 mana. It's a sorcery and says choose 3. You may choose the same mode more than once. It says Fiery Confluence deals 1 damage to each creature. Fiery Confluence deals 2 damage to each opponent, or destroy target artifact. Now, because you can choose the same mode more than once, ideally, if you really wanted to kind of like jump in on this card, you could have this deal 3 damage to each creature, 6 damage to target opponent, or destroy 3 artifacts.
Not bad.
I actually don't like any mode on this card. Paying 4 mana to destroy 3 artifacts, not necessarily splendid. The dealing 1 damage to each creature, I'm assuming that for this really to be important or impactful, you're probably going to have to use that mode 3 times. And even at that, this is kind of just a worse Anger of the Gods, and I don't play that card in EDH. And then being able to deal 2 damage to each opponent, even if I wanted to make that repeated or kind of mix and match this card, I'm not a fan. I get that it's 4 mana because you could do any combination of these modes, but this card is expensive and not very impactful.
Chuck it in the bin.
Sadly, another one of the new cards that I'm going to be removing from this list is Pain Distributor. This is 2 and a red for a creature Devil Citizen. It's a 2/3 with Menace, and it says whenever a player casts the first spell each turn, they create a treasure token. It then says whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, Pain Distributor deals 1 damage to that player. So gives your opponent some treasures, and then kind of hurts them a little bit for using those treasures, but dealing 1 damage to ramp my opponents, it's not something that I want to be doing. Also, the way that this card is worded, whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, this means if I'm playing up against a deck that is a Spell Slinger deck, and they have a bunch of instants, they're potentially making like 4 treasure tokens every turn cycle. I'm not getting the most advantage from this card, and I really don't want to help my opponents out.
I think I see this hit the field and I start to smile.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. Dealing 1 damage, and say for example, this sits around in play, and like even say it sits around in play and deals like 10 damage to my opponent. That means I've ramped them 10 mana over the course of the game. That could be enough for them to just win.
Oh yeah.
Workshop Elders is another card that's going to get the cut here. This is 6 and a blue for a total of 7 mana. It is a creature human artificer. It's a 4/4 and says artifact creatures you control have flying. It also says at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may have target non-creature artifact you control become a 0/0 artifact creature. If you do, put 4 +1/+1 counters on it. So this does give you an outlet for the late game. This was a card that I wasn't super thrilled on removing. But nevertheless, it is still a 7-drop, and most games, I don't really want to be casting spells that cost more than 6. So I did still decide to make the removal here. If you do play around in a slower meta, maybe go ahead and keep this card in the list, just because I don't know if you're capable of getting to 7. But there's not really a ton of ways for you to cheat this card into play in this deck, at least not currently in its current iteration. So this is going to get the axe.
I mean, I can't fault you for that, man. I mean, 7 mana is a bit aggressive. I mean, even if you are getting a 4/4 flyer, but I mean, it can't attack that turn, you know?
Yeah. Next up on our list of cuts, we have another card that like really wants to be a board wipe, but isn't a board wipe, and that is Vampire's Vengeance. This is 2 and a red for an instant that says Vampire's Vengeance deals 2 damage to each non-vampire creature, and you create a blood token. This card is in a list because it says it makes a blood token, and I swear that's the only reason why.
What do you mean? There's no vampires in the deck, right? So
There's none. There's not a single vampire in this list.
Huh.
So this is still going to hit all of your things. And most of our things are small. So this might actually kill some of our things.
Hey, you get a blood token.
You do get a blood token. This thing is gone. We're going to be removing Root Out. This is 2 and a green for a sorcery. It says destroy target artifact or enchantment. Investigate. There is another card included in the Precon that does almost this exact same thing, but instead of investigating, it just gives you a treasure token, and I felt like the redundancy wasn't necessarily needed, so I kept the one in that gives us a treasure token and cut the one that makes a clue. Evercoil Phoenix is 2 and 2 red for a total of 4 mana. It's a creature Phoenix. It's a 4/4. It has flying. It's also got mutate of 3 and a red. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this really weird mechanic, it says that if you cast a spell for its mutate cost, put it over or under target non-human creature you own. They mutate into the creature on top, plus all abilities from under it. So it's kind of like you have 2 creatures that you just kind of combined into one. So it'll have flying, and it'll also say that whenever this creature mutates, create a red artifact token named Feather with, you can pay 1 and sacrifice Feather to return target Phoenix card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So it will only ever recur this creature because this is the only Phoenix, and this card is in the list specifically because it makes a token with a weird name, and that's what the other legendary creature that you can run this deck with cares about.
Bye-bye.
Saheeli's Artistry is one of the cards that I got rid of here. This was a little bit more of a tough choice in terms of overall removal. This is 4 and 2 blue for a sorcery that says choose one or both. The first mode says create a token that's a copy of target artifact. And the second mode says create a token that's a copy of target creature, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So 6 mana, you're going to be able to make 2 copies of things, which is really nice. But I did want to lower the overall mana cost of this deck, and coming in at 6 mana, this was kind of a difficult cut, but ultimately I just felt like it wasn't worth it, and we can include better things.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, man. I mean, once you start getting into the 6-7 mana cost cards, it's like, do we really need it?
Speaking of 7 mana cost cards, that's the next one we're going to talk about, and this is Brass's Bounty. This is 6 and a red for a total of 7 mana. It is a sorcery, and it says for each land you control, create a treasure token. Now, I know what a lot of people out there are thinking. They're like, wait a second, this is a treasure deck. We want to care about these things, and this makes a ton of them. I hate this card. And I hate this card because not only is it uncastable for the majority of the game, but in order for this to actually net me positive, I have to have at least 8 lands in play. Otherwise, I'm tapping 7 lands to just cast this thing. And even if I'm doing that, I'm essentially time-walking myself. I'm kind of skipping my turn so that I can bank all those treasures. Yes, it does make treasure tokens for me, and yes, it does kind of pseudo-ramp me for the following turn, but this requires that I do absolutely nothing the turn I cast it.
Yeah, I love and hate this card because, like, it really is like, do you want to play stuff this turn? All right, well, you could play this, and then you can think about doing stuff next turn, like a lot of stuff.
So, I don't know. I mean, I know that you could sacrifice those treasure tokens immediately, so you still have access to stuff, but why cast this for 7 mana if, for example, you make 7 treasure tokens? You didn't ramp. The last non-land card that we're going to talk about here is Replication Ring. This is 3 mana for a snow artifact that you can tap to add 1 mana of any color. It also says at the beginning of your upkeep, put a night counter on Replication Ring. Then, if it has 8 or more night counters on it, remove all of them and create 8 colorless snow artifact tokens named Replication Ring with tap, add 1 mana of any color. Oh boy. So, say for example, you've got this thing on turn 3. You have to wait 8 more turns, which now puts you at turn 11, to see any kind of additional profit off of this. I'm never going to be able to see that because the game's just simply not going to last that long. This is a deck that doesn't include any kind of way to proliferate or tick those counters up. And paying 3 mana for an artifact that taps for 1 isn't very good.
So here's the thing. So what I will say about this removal, David, is although I am upset because Replication Ring is probably one of my favorite cards to play in Magic. I completely agree that in a game by turn 11, if you're not really built around doing things with this ring, it is almost pointless because by turn 11, your opponents have done so much already.
I mean,
So,
by that point, the game is over. If you're playing around with a lot of proliferation style effects or ways for you to be able to manipulate those counters, that's great. However, there's no way for us to really do that in this list.
I mean, I get it.
The last 6 cards that we're going to talk about are all lands. These are going to be removed from the list to make room for the 6 artifact lands that we talked about earlier. So the next 3 lands that we're going to talk about, they all basically do the exact same thing. They enter the battlefield tapped unless you reveal one of 2 different basic lands they care about, and then they can tap for one of 2 different colors. So we're going to be removing Frostboil Snarl, Game Trail, and Vine Glimmer Snarl. These 3 cards, I just feel like could be replaced by the artifact lands we talked about earlier. I know that the artifact duels always enter the battlefield tap, but having that relevant type on them as well is just, I feel like, so much better than a card that sometimes is tapped versus sometimes is not tapped. So I do think that these just get cut to make room. And then similarly, we have 3 other cards that we're going to talk about, removing all 3 of these being lands as well. The first of which being Simic Growth Chamber. This is a land that enters the battlefield tapped. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you have to return a land you control back to your hand, and then you can tap it for both a green and a blue. I like these lands if you're playing with a graveyard strategy, or if you're actively trying to bounce things. Maybe you're playing like a landfall deck where you want to make sure you hit the lands every turn, but we're not playing those strategies. This is just a slow bounce land in this list. We're going to be removing Evolving Wilds. This is a land that you can tap and sack to search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tap, and then shuffle. Evolving Wilds is a card that I don't actually think I ever enjoy playing in any of my decks. For the most part, I feel like you just kind of, I don't know, build your mana base to any kind of extent of competency, and you probably shouldn't have color issues. And this isn't a list that is running super heavy in any one direction, where, like, in terms of pips in a card, we have no like triple pip card. None where it's like you need 3 red or 3 blue or 3 green or so forth and so on. And then the last one here being Myriad Landscape, and this one is a land that enters the battlefield tapped. It can tap for a colorless, or you can pay 2 mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to search your library for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type. Put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Basically the same kind of logic as to why I got rid of Evolving Wilds applies to Myriad Landscape as well, but I like this card even less because it's mana intensive, and it itself comes in tapped.
Let me tell you something right now. I did the same thing by removing this, but I will also say, and I'll go on record, and you can put this on my gravestone, there is no better feeling than playing this turn 1, playing a land on turn 2, tapping it for a Soul Ring, and then tapping this in the Soul Ring for the Myriad Landscape trigger. There is no better feeling in this world.
Sure there is. I personally love the playtest hands that I've had, where I drop either Great Furnace, Tree of Tales, or Seed of the Synod on turn 1 and tap that down for a Soul Ring, and then tap that down for a Signet or a Talisman. But Rashmi on turn 2 with 3 artifacts, and then she makes a 4th with a treasure. Good.
Whatever, David. Well, David, that was a really fun list to see. I love the additions. The removals were perfect. I really don't see any issues whatsoever. Any final thoughts on the deck?
So I think this is a really interesting list. I love the fact that we're getting an artifact deck that's outside of typical artifact colors. I think playing around with like artifact tokens is a neat and interesting way for Teamer to kind of exist within this realm. I do know that there were a lot of people who had made comments and were really disappointed that this wasn't focused more around like energy. And I do think that would have been cool, especially considering that both of the legendary creatures that are capable of helming this list are from Kaladesh, the plane with energy. So I do think that would have been an interesting kind of take on this color combination for artifacts, but I'm still happy that these do exist.
All right, David. Well, I appreciate those last final thoughts. You were given $100 for this upgrade. What are we at?
We are at pretty much exactly 100, at least as of the time of this recording.
David, I got to say thank you for not cheating. But that wraps it up for this video. If you guys enjoyed the video, please make sure to leave a like down below. Don't forget to subscribe. And don't forget to leave a comment down below. Let us know what you would have put in instead. Also, let us know which removals you'd probably keep in the deck. Also, don't forget to follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and on Twitter. It is at Guys That Magic for all of those. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day.
Later.